The dust-laden winds of the Texas Panhandle carried whispers of a new arrival to Dalhart as Lillian Thompson stepped off the stagecoach, her chestnut hair whipping against her face in the autumn of 1874. She clutched a small valise in one hand and a letter of employment in the other, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake coming to this frontier town, where the only thing taller than the men's tails were the endless skies above. "Madam, you'll be wanting Widow Pierce's boarding house," the stagecoach driver said, pointing down the main street. "Can't miss it, only place with geraniums in the windows." Lillian nodded her thanks, straightening her travel-worn dress. At 22, she had left everything she knew in Boston following her parents' death from influenza, armed only with her education and a position as the new schoolteacher in Dalhart. The town spread before her like a rough sketch, a collection of wooden buildings, some painted, most weathered by sun and sand, with hitching posts occupied by horses that seemed as tired as their owners. Men in dusty hats tipped them politely as she passed, while women gave her curious glances, no doubt wondering about this newcomer in their midst. Lillian's leather boots kicked up dust as she made her way toward the boarding house, her eyes taking in everything: the general store with its barrels of goods on the porch, the saloon already alive with midday patrons, and the small whitewashed building that must be her new schoolhouse. A commotion near the bank caught her attention. A tall man with broad shoulders stood arguing with another man in a fine suit. Even from a distance, Lillian could see the tension in his stance, like a coiled spring ready to release. "I've told you already, Buchanan, I ain't selling." The tall man's voice carried across the street. "Not to you, not to anyone." The man in the suit, Buchanan, adjusted his hat. "Everything has a price, Drake. You're just too stubborn to name yours." Lillian tried not to stare, but something about the tall man held her gaze. Perhaps it was the way he stood his ground, or how the sun glinted off his sandy brown hair visible beneath his hat. She continued toward the boarding house, but not before the man called Drake noticed her watching. Their eyes met briefly, his as blue as the Texas sky, before Lillian looked away, embarrassed to be caught eavesdropping. The Widow Pierce's boarding house was indeed impossible to miss, with its cheerful red geraniums and fresh white paint that made it stand out amongst the dusty buildings. Lillian knocked on the door, relieved when it opened to reveal a plump woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. "You must be Miss Thompson," the woman said, her smile warm. "I'm Martha Pierce. We've been expecting you." "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Pierce. I hope I'm not too late in arriving." "Not at all, dear. School doesn't start until next Monday. Gives you time to settle in." Mrs. Pierce ushered her inside. "Let me show you to your room. You'll be our only boarder for now, which means you'll have the washroom to yourself." Lillian's room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a desk beneath a window overlooking the street. It would do nicely. "Supper's at 6, Mrs. Pierce informed her. "In the meantime, feel free to explore our little town. Mayor Jackson is eager to meet you. He'll likely stop by after supper." After unpacking her few belongings, Lillian decided to visit her schoolhouse. The building stood at the edge of town, a simple one-room structure with rows of wooden desks facing a larger desk and blackboard. As she tried the door, she found it unlocked. The interior smelled of chalk dust and old books. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dancing dust motes. Lillian ran her fingers along the teacher's desk, imagining herself here, helping shape young minds in this frontier town. "School doesn't start till Monday," a deep voice said from the doorway. Lillian whirled around to find the man from earlier, Drake, leaning against the doorframe, his hat in his hands. Up close, she could see the weathered lines around his eyes, suggesting a man who spent his days under the open sky. I'm aware, she replied, smoothing her skirt nervously. I wanted to familiarize myself with the schoolhouse before then. He nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips. You must be Miss Thompson. Word travels fast in Dalhart. And you are? She asked, though she already knew his first name from the exchange she'd overheard. Drake Buchanan. No relation to the man I was arguing with earlier, though I suspect you witnessed that. His eyes twinkled with amusement. Thomas Buchanan and I share nothing but a name and mutual dislike. I try not to make judgments based on first impressions, Mr. Buchanan. Call me Drake. Everyone does. He took a step into the schoolhouse. I own the Silver Creek Ranch just north of town. My brother and I run cattle. Lillian wasn't sure why he was telling her this, but she nodded politely. I'm pleased to meet you, Drake. I'm Lillian Thompson, though I suppose you already knew that. The new schoolteacher from Boston, he smiled. Mayor Jackson hasn't stopped talking about how lucky we are to have someone with your credentials. Lillian felt her cheeks warm. I merely hope to serve this community well. Drake studied her for a moment, then said, Dalhart's rough around the edges, but it's good people here. Most of them anyway. He placed his hat back on his head. If you need anything, Miss Thompson, don't hesitate to ask. My ranch hands have children who will be in your class. Thank you, she replied, surprised by his offer. As he turned to leave, he paused. One more thing, watch out for Thomas Buchanan. He's been buying up properties all over town. Claims he's bringing progress, but all he's bringing is trouble. With that cryptic warning, Drake departed, leaving Lillian to wonder what complications lay beneath the surface of this seemingly simple town. The next few days passed in a flurry of preparations and introductions. Lillian met the mayor, a jovial man with a walrus mustache, and many of the townsfolk who would be entrusting their children to her care. She organized the schoolhouse, reviewed her teaching materials, and created lesson plans. She saw Drake Buchanan a few times, always from a distance, riding into town on his handsome bay stallion, conferring with the blacksmith, or exiting the general store with supplies. He always tipped his hat when he saw her, but they didn't speak again. On Sunday evening, Lillian sat on the boarding house porch, enjoying the cooler air as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The distant sound of a piano drifted from the saloon, accompanied by raucous laughter. Mind if I join you? A woman's voice interrupted her thoughts. Lillian looked up to see a well-dressed woman about her own age, with copper-colored hair pinned elegantly beneath a modest hat. Please do, Lillian replied, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. I'm Sophia Reed, the woman said, settling her skirts as she sat. My husband owns the general store. I wanted to welcome you properly to Dalhart. That's very kind of you, Mrs. Reed. Sophia, please. She smiled warmly. We don't stand on ceremony much here. Besides, I'm hoping we might become friends. There aren't many educated women my age in town. I'd like that, Lillian admitted, realizing how lonely she'd been despite the friendly welcome she'd received. They chatted about Boston, about Dalhart, and about the challenges of frontier life. As darkness fell, their conversation turned to the town's inhabitants. I saw you speaking with Drake Buchanan the other day, Sophia remarked. He doesn't usually take to newcomers so quickly. We only spoke briefly, Lillian said. He seemed intense. Sophia laughed lightly. That's Drake. Intense is a good word for him. Been that way since his wife died 5 years ago. Oh, Lillian hadn't known he was a widower. That's terrible. Fever took her, Sophia explained. Left him with his ranch and a broken heart. He's raised more cattle than conversation since then. He mentioned a brother, Daniel. Younger by 4 years. He helps run the ranch, but he's cut from different cloth. More sociable, less. She searched for the word, haunted. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Thomas Buchanan, who was escorting a young woman toward the boarding house. "Miss Thompson," he called, tipping his hat. "Allow me to introduce my daughter, Charlotte. She'll be your assistant at the school." Lillian rose to greet them, surprised by this news. "I wasn't aware I would have an assistant." "A recent arrangement with the mayor," Thomas explained smoothly. "Charlotte has been teaching the children informally while we awaited your arrival." Charlotte Buchanan was perhaps 19, with pale blonde hair and her father's shrewd eyes. She offered a thin smile that didn't reach those eyes. "I look forward to working with you, Miss Thompson." Something in her tone suggested otherwise, but Lillian returned the smile. "As do I, Miss Buchanan." After they departed, Sophia sighed. "That man is trouble, Lillian. He came to Dalhart last year with plans to turn it into some grand railroad hub. Been buying land wherever he can, pressuring folks to sell." "Drake mentioned something similar," Lillian remarked. "Drake's land is what Buchanan wants most. It controls the water rights for half the county. But Drake would sooner die than sell Silver Creek." Sophia stood, straightening her dress. "Just be careful around Charlotte. She's her father's daughter, through and through." The next morning, Lillian faced her first class of 23 students, ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. Charlotte Buchanan sat at a small desk near the door, ostensibly to assist but clearly there to observe. "Good morning, children," Lillian began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I am Miss Thompson, and I'm honored to be your teacher." The younger children stared with wide eyes, while the older ones assessed her with the wariness of those who had seen teachers come and go. One girl in particular, about 12, with dark braids and a determined expression, watched Lillian intently. "Before we begin, I'd like to learn your names," Lillian continued. "Let's start at the front row and work our way back." The children introduced themselves one by one. The girl with braids was Nora Buchanan, no relation to Thomas or Charlotte, she quickly clarified, but Drake's niece. Daniel's daughter. By midday, Lillian had established order in her classroom and begun assessing her pupils' varying levels of education. Some could barely write their names, while others, like Nora, were surprisingly well-read. Charlotte offered little assistance, instead making occasional notes in a small book. When the children went outside for their midday meal, she approached Lillian's desk. "You seem to have things well in hand, Miss Thompson," she said, her tone neutral. "Though I notice you haven't mentioned anything about the upcoming changes to the town." "What changes would those be?" Lillian asked carefully. "My father's development plans. The railroad will transform Dalhart from a dusty cattle town into a proper city." Charlotte's eyes gleamed with ambition. "The children should be prepared for progress. I focus on reading, writing, arithmetic, and history, Miss Buchanan. Speculation about the town's future isn't part of my curriculum." Charlotte's smile tightened. "Of course. I merely thought the children should understand the opportunities ahead." She gathered her things. "I have matters to attend to this afternoon. I trust you can manage alone." Before Lillian could respond, Charlotte had swept from the room, leaving Lillian to wonder about the true purpose of her assistance. The afternoon passed without incident, and as Lillian dismissed the children, Nora Buchanan lingered behind. "Miss Thompson," she asked, clutching her slate to her chest. "Did you really come all the way from Boston?" "I did," Lillian confirmed. "Why would anyone leave a city for Dalhart?" The question held genuine curiosity. Lillian considered her answer carefully. "Sometimes change is necessary, even when it's difficult. My parents passed away and I needed a fresh start." Nora nodded solemnly. "Like Uncle Drake after Aunt Sarah died." "I suppose so," Lillian agreed, touched by the child's insight. "He's different now. Pa says he used to laugh more." Nora shifted her weight from one foot to another. Do you think people can start over and be happy again? The question caught Lillian off guard with its depth. I believe they can, Nora. It takes time and courage, but yes, I think happiness can find us again, even after great sorrow. Nora seemed satisfied with this answer. Uncle Drake is coming to fetch me. Would you like to meet him properly? Not just talking about the schoolhouse, I mean. Before Lillian could form a response, the door opened and Drake Buchanan filled the frame, his tall figure momentarily blocking the afternoon sun. "There's my scholar," he said warmly to Nora before tipping his hat to Lillian. "Miss Thompson, how was your first day wrangling these wild ones?" "Less wild than anticipated," Lillian replied with a smile. "You have a bright niece, Mr. Buchanan." "Drake," he corrected her again. "And yes, Nora takes after her mother in that regard. Book smart and stubborn as the day is long." "I'm right here," Nora complained, though her eyes danced with affection for her uncle. "That you are," Drake agreed, ruffling her hair. "Go wait with the horses. I need a word with Miss Thompson." Once Nora had departed, Drake's expression grew serious. "Charlotte Buchanan giving you any trouble?" Lillian was surprised by his directness. "Not exactly trouble. She seems to have her own ideas about education, and about everything else." Drake moved further into the classroom, his spurs jingling slightly with each step. "Thomas Buchanan didn't arrange for her to assist you out of the goodness of his heart. He's looking for leverage, information, anything he can use." "Leverage for what?" "Control." Drake ran a hand through his hair, having removed his hat upon entering the schoolhouse. "Dalhart sits at a crossroads. The railroad's coming, sure as sunrise, but where it goes and who benefits, that's still being decided." Lillian frowned. "And what does this have to do with me or the school?" "Knowledge is power, Miss Thompson. Buchanan knows that better than most. He'll use Charlotte to influence what you teach, how you teach it." Drake's blue eyes held hers steadily. "This town needs someone who'll educate these children honestly, not push Buchanan's vision of progress at any cost." "I don't intend to be used by anyone, Mr. Buchanan Drake," Lillian stated firmly. "I came here to teach, not to take sides in local politics." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough, but in Dalhart neutrality is a luxury few can afford for long." He placed his hat back on his head. "Just thought you should know what you're dealing with." As he turned to leave, Lillian found herself calling after him. "Why do you care what I teach or don't teach? You don't have children in my class." Drake paused at the door. "I care about this town, Miss Thompson. More than that, I care about the truth. Something tells me you do too." With that, he was gone, leaving Lillian with more questions than answers. The following weeks settled into a rhythm. Lillian taught her students with dedication, slowly winning over even the most reluctant learners. Charlotte's attendance became sporadic, which suited Lillian fine when present. Thomas Buchanan's daughter seemed more interested in promoting her father's vision for Dalhart than in actual education. Lillian also came to understand the town's divisions. Most of the ranchers and longtime residents sided with Drake, viewing Thomas Buchanan's development plans with suspicion. Newcomers and merchants tended to support Buchanan, enticed by promises of wealth when the railroad came. One crisp October afternoon, as Lillian was closing up the schoolhouse, Mayor Jackson appeared at her door. "Miss Thompson," he greeted her cheerfully, though she noted tension behind his smile. "Might I have a word?" "Of course, Mayor." Lillian gestured to one of the student desks, which the rotund man eyed doubtfully before deciding to remain standing. "There's to be a town meeting tomorrow evening," he explained. "About the railroad plans. It would be beneficial if you attended." "I'm not sure what contribution I could make to such discussions." The mayor fidgeted with his watch chain. The matter of education will arise. Mr. Buchanan proposes building a new, larger school, a proper academy, once the railroad brings more families. I see. Lillian kept her expression neutral. And my current position would be reevaluated. The mayor couldn't quite meet her eyes. Nothing personal, you understand. Progress requires certain adjustments. Of course, Lillian replied coolly. I'll attend. After the mayor departed, Lillian locked up and began walking back to the boarding house, her mind churning with implications. She was so distracted she nearly collided with Drake, who was leading his horse down the main street. "Whoa there," he said, steadying her with a hand on her arm. "You look like you're carrying the weight of Texas on your shoulders." The concern in his voice was genuine, and Lillian found herself explaining the mayor's visit. Drake's expression darkened as she spoke. "So it begins," he muttered. "Buchanan's making his move, threatening jobs, promising progress. The town does need a larger school," Lillian pointed out reasonably. "Several families share desks as it is." "It's not about the school, Lillian." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it caught both of them by surprise. "Pardon me, Miss Thompson." "Lillian is fine," she said softly. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. "Join me for supper," Drake said suddenly. "At the hotel dining room. I want to explain what's really happening in Dalhart." Propriety suggested she decline. A single woman dining with a bachelor would certainly cause talk, but Lillian found herself nodding. "I'll need to inform Mrs. Pierce." "I'll wait for you," Drake replied, a smile brightening his serious features. An hour later, they sat across from each other in the hotel's small but respectable dining room. Drake had changed into a clean shirt, and Lillian had pinned her hair more carefully. Several townspeople glanced their way with undisguised curiosity. "This will be all over town by morning," Lillian murmured as the waiter brought their coffee. "Let them talk," Drake replied without concern. "Nothing improper about two people having a meal and a conversation." The food arrived, simple fare of steak, potatoes, and greens, and as they ate, Drake explained the situation with Thomas Buchanan more fully. "The railroad's coming regardless," he said. "That's been decided in offices far from here. But where exactly it stops, where the depot is built, that's still up for grabs." "And Mr. Buchanan wants it on land he controls," Lillian guessed. Drake nodded. "He's been buying property all through town, offering fair prices at first, then applying pressure when folks refuse." His jaw tightened. "My land has the water rights he needs for his grand plans. Without Silver Creek, his development will struggle. Is that what you were arguing about that day I arrived?" "Yes. His latest offer." Drake cut his steak with more force than necessary. "He doesn't understand that some things aren't for sale." There was something in his tone, a depth of feeling that went beyond business considerations. Lillian sensed it had to do with his late wife. "Your ranch must mean a great deal to you," she said gently. Drake's eyes softened as they met hers. "Sarah and I built it together. Every fence post, every head of cattle, it was our dream." He set down his fork. "When she died, that land became all I had left of her, of us." Lillian reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. "I understand. After my parents died, I kept their books, even though I had little room in my trunk. Some things hold more than their physical value." Drake turned his hand to catch her fingers before she could withdraw them. "Exactly." The word was almost a whisper. For a moment, they sat in silence, connected by shared understanding of loss. Then Drake cleared his throat and released her hand. "Tomorrow's meeting will be Buchanan's attempt to sway public opinion. He'll make grand promises, jobs, prosperity, modern conveniences. He'll present those who oppose him as backwards, resistant to progress." "What will you do?" Lillian asked. "Speak the truth. That progress doesn't have to come at the expense of what makes this town worth living in." Drake's gaze was intense. "Will you stand with me, Lillian?" The question carried weight beyond the immediate issue of the town meeting. Lillian considered her position carefully. "I came to Dalhart to teach," she said slowly, "not to engage in politics. But if Mr. Buchanan intends to use education as a pawn in his game, then I have a responsibility to speak up." She straightened her shoulders. "Yes, Drake, I'll stand with you." His smile was like sunrise breaking across the plains. "I was hoping you'd say that." The town meeting was held in the church, the only building in Dalhart large enough to accommodate nearly every adult resident. Lillian arrived early, securing a seat near the front where she could observe everything. Drake entered shortly after, nodding to her before taking his place among the ranchers. Thomas Buchanan arrived with Flourish, accompanied by Charlotte and several well-dressed men Lillian didn't recognize. Mayor Jackson called the meeting to order, nervously eyeing the divided room. "Citizens of Dalhart," he began, "we gather today to discuss the future of our town in light of the coming railroad. Mr. Thomas Buchanan has prepared a presentation of his development plans." Buchanan stepped forward, his confidence filling the room. "Friends and neighbors," he addressed them, though Lillian noted he was relatively new to be claiming such familiarity. "Progress is coming to Dalhart, whether we embrace it or not. The question is whether we'll benefit from it or be left behind." He unveiled a large map showing proposed developments, new streets, businesses, homes, and prominently, a railroad depot near land he owned. For nearly 30 minutes, he painted a picture of a transformed Dalhart, with prosperity for all who aligned with his vision. "Among my plans," he continued, "is a modern academy to replace our humble schoolhouse. Miss Charlotte has been working on a progressive curriculum that will prepare our children for the future, not just teach them about the past." Charlotte stood, offering what Lillian recognized as a rehearsed smile. "Education must evolve with the times," she stated. "While Miss Thompson has done admirably with limited resources, the children of Dalhart deserve better." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lillian felt eyes turn toward her, some sympathetic, others appraising. When Buchanan finished, Mayor Jackson invited questions. Several merchants spoke in favor of the plans, while a few older residents expressed concerns about costs and changes to their way of life. Then Drake stood. The room quieted immediately. "Thomas Buchanan paints a pretty picture," he began, his deep voice carrying easily. "But he leaves out important details, like who will actually own this new Dalhart he envisions. Who will control the water, the access to the railroad, the prices we all pay for goods?" Buchanan's face darkened. "Progress requires investment, Drake. Those who take risks deserve rewards. And those who built this town deserve to keep what they've earned," Drake countered. "Your map conveniently requires land that many here aren't willing to sell." "Everything has a price," Buchanan insisted. "That's where you're wrong." Drake's gaze swept the room. "Some things aren't for sale, not our land, not our water rights, and certainly not our children's minds." He turned toward Lillian. "Miss Thompson came here to teach our children, not to be replaced when convenient for your plans. She's earned our respect and their trust." Lillian felt a flush rise to her cheeks as attention shifted to her. Mayor Jackson, clearly uncomfortable, asked, "Miss Thompson, would you care to address the educational aspects of this proposal?" Rising to her feet, Lillian took a deep breath. "I came to Dalhart because I believe every child deserves education, regardless of where they live or their family's circumstances. In my short time here, I've found the children eager to learn and the community supportive of their schooling." She met Charlotte's gaze directly. I welcome improvements to our facilities, but I question the need to replace a curriculum that addresses the actual needs of Dalhart's children with one designed in boardrooms by people who have never spent a day teaching them. Charlotte's composure slipped momentarily, revealing irritation. Furthermore, Lillian continued, I wonder why Mr. Buchanan's plans for the school weren't discussed with the current teacher unless the intention was always to replace not just the building, but those who serve within it. The church erupted in discussion, with several parents of Lillian's students speaking up in her defense. Drake caught her eye across the room, his expression a mixture of admiration and something warmer that made her heart beat faster. The meeting concluded without resolution, but it was clear the town was divided. As people filed out, Lillian found herself surrounded by supportive parents, while across the room Buchanan conferred intensely with his associates. Drake made his way to her side. You spoke well, he said quietly. Buchanan won't forget it. I spoke the truth, Lillian replied. As did you. May I walk you home? He asked. I suspect we have more to discuss. The autumn night was cool as they strolled toward the boarding house, the stars brilliant above them in the vast Texas sky. Buchanan won't give up easily, Drake warned. He's invested too much in his plans. What happens next? Lillian asked. He'll try to sway more people to his side. Offer incentives, make promises. Drake's expression was grim. And for those who stand against him, he'll look for leverage. Like my position as teacher, Drake nodded. Be careful, Lillian. You've made yourself a target tonight. They reached the boarding house porch, pausing in the pool of light from the front window. Drake stood close enough that Lillian could smell leather and pine on him, could see the concern etched in his features. I'm not afraid of Thomas Buchanan, she stated, though her voice trembled slightly not from fear, but from Drake's proximity. Maybe you should be, he said softly. But I'm glad you're not. His hand reached up, hesitating near her cheek before dropping back to his side. Good night, Lillian. Good night, Drake, she whispered, watching as he turned and walked away, his silhouette gradually fading into the darkness. The following days proved Drake's predictions accurate. Thomas Buchanan increased his efforts to win supporters, hosting dinners at the hotel for influential citizens and publishing pamphlets outlining his vision for Dalhart's future. Lillian noticed subtle changes in how some townspeople treated her. Several merchants suddenly claimed to be out of items she requested. A few parents kept their children home from school, citing illness that didn't prevent them from being seen playing in town later. Charlotte Buchanan returned to the schoolhouse, her assistants now feeling more like surveillance. She questioned Lillian's teaching methods, suggested improvements to lessons, and took careful note of which children seemed most loyal to their teacher. One afternoon, as the children filed out at day's end, Thomas Buchanan himself appeared at the schoolhouse door. Miss Thompson, he greeted her with practiced charm. Might I have a moment of your time? Charlotte lingered, but her father dismissed her with a nod. When they were alone, he settled into a chair across from Lillian's desk, entirely at ease. You've made quite an impression on Dalhart, he began, his tone conversational. Not many newcomers would have the courage to speak against progress so publicly. I spoke against replacing what works with what's unproven, Lillian corrected him. That's not opposing progress, Mr. Buchanan. It's exercising caution, he chuckled. You're as direct as Drake. No wonder you've aligned yourself with him. I haven't aligned myself with anyone, Lillian insisted. I simply spoke my mind. Of course. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Nevertheless, I admire your spirit. In fact, I'd like to offer you a position supervising teacher at my new academy once it's built. Double your current salary, plus a proper house in town, not just a rented room. The offer caught Lillian off guard. That's Generous. I recognize talent, Miss Thompson. I'd prefer to have you working with me rather than against me. Buchanan leaned forward. All I ask is that you reconsider your public stance on my development plans. Your endorsement would carry significant weight with the families in this town. Lillian studied him, understanding now the true purpose of his offer. You're asking me to sell my opinion, Mr. Buchanan. His expression hardened slightly. I'm offering you an opportunity for advancement. Most would consider it a fair exchange. Rising to her feet, Lillian gathered her papers. I'm not for sale, Mr. Buchanan, neither my opinion nor my integrity. Anger flashed in his eyes, quickly masked by a calculated smile. Everyone has their price, Miss Thompson. I simply haven't found yours yet. He stood, towering over her desk. Consider my offer carefully. It won't remain open indefinitely. After he left, Lillian's hands trembled as she collected her things. The implied threat in his parting words was unmistakable. As she stepped outside to lock the schoolhouse, she found Drake waiting, leaning against the hitching post with his horse beside him. Buchanan just left, he observed, concern evident in his voice. Everything all right. He offered me a position at his new academy, Lillian replied, still processing the encounter. At double my salary. Drake's expression darkened. In exchange for my public support of his plans. My influence with the families. Lillian met his gaze. I declined. Relief washed over Drake's features. He won't take rejection well. He already didn't. Lillian described Buchanan's parting words. Drake cursed under his breath, then immediately apologized. Sorry, but that man. He shook his head. Let me ride you back to town. I can walk, Lillian protested. It's not far. Please, Lillian. The intensity in his eyes silenced her objections. Humor me. She allowed him to help her onto his horse. Then he swung up behind her, one arm securely around her waist as they rode toward town. The closeness was improper, yet Lillian couldn't bring herself to mind. In fact, she found herself acutely aware of his chest against her back, his breath warm against her hair. Thank you, he said quietly as they rode. For what? For not taking his offer, for standing your ground. His voice was rough with emotion. It would have been easier to accept. Easier, perhaps, but wrong. Lillian turned slightly to look at him. Some principles aren't negotiable. Something shifted in Drake's eyes as they held hers, a deepening respect, and something more that made her heart race. For a moment she thought he might say something more, but they had reached the boarding house. As he helped her down, his hands lingered at her waist. Lillian, he began, then seemed to reconsider. Be careful. Buchanan doesn't give up easily. Neither do I, she replied with more confidence than she felt. His smile was warm as he mounted his horse again. I'm beginning to see that. The following Sunday after church services, Sophia Reed invited Lillian to join her family for dinner. The Reed home was modest but comfortable, and Lillian found herself relaxing in the company of Sophia, her husband James, and their young son. You've certainly stirred things up, James commented as they ate. Half the town's talking about how you stood up to Buchanan at the meeting. The other half is wondering about you and Drake Buchanan, Sophia added with a meaningful glance. He's been seen at the schoolhouse quite often lately. Lillian felt her cheeks warm. Drake has been kind enough to advise me about the situation with Mr. Thomas Buchanan. Nothing more. Sophia's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. Drake hasn't shown interest in any woman since Sarah died. Until now. Sophia, her husband warned gently, don't embarrass our guest. It's not embarrassment to acknowledge what everyone can see, Sophia replied unrepentantly. Besides, I think it would be wonderful if Drake found happiness again, and Lillian could do far worse than a man who owns the finest ranch in the county. I'm not looking for a husband, Lillian stated firmly, though the conversation had set her pulse racing. "I came to Dalhart to teach." "And teach you shall," James assured her. "Though Buchanan's making things difficult for those who oppose him. Several of my suppliers have mysteriously raised their prices since I spoke against his plans at the meeting. He's trying to pressure people," Sophia explained. "Make it costly to resist." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. James went to investigate, returning moments later with a grim expression. "There's a fire at the schoolhouse," he reported. "They're calling for volunteers to help extinguish it." Lillian gasped, rising immediately. "My students work the books." They hurried toward the school, where smoke billowed from the windows. A bucket line had formed, passing water from the town well to the flames. Drake was among them, his shirt soaked with sweat as he directed men on the roof. The fire was contained before it could destroy the entire building, but the damage was extensive. The interior was charred, desks reduced to kindling, books and papers nothing but ash. Lillian stood before the smoking ruins, devastation washing over her. Everything she had built in Dalhart, lesson plans, student records, carefully collected teaching materials gone. Drake found her there as darkness fell, the last of the volunteers departing. "Lillian," he said gently, "you should get some rest. There's nothing more to be done tonight." "Who would do this?" she whispered, though she suspected the answer. Drake's expression hardened. "No proof yet, but the timing is suspicious. Sheriff says it started at multiple points, not an accident." "Because I refused Buchanan's offer." Lillian's voice caught on a sob she couldn't suppress. Without hesitation, Drake pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest as tears finally came. His hand stroked her hair gently as she cried. "This isn't your fault," he murmured against her temple. "And it isn't the end." When her tears subsided, Lillian became acutely aware of their embrace of his strength, of the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. Propriety demanded she step back, yet she found herself reluctant to leave the comfort he offered. Slowly, she raised her head to meet his gaze. The tenderness she found there took her breath away. "Drake," she whispered, uncertain what she meant to say. His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek, his touch feather light. "We'll rebuild, Lillian, together. I promise you that." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then the sound of approaching footsteps broke the spell, and they separated hastily as Mayor Jackson appeared, his round face flushed with exertion. "Miss Thompson," he panted. "Terrible business, this fire. Simply terrible." "Yes," she agreed, composing herself. "What will happen to the school now, Mayor?" The mayor exchanged a look with Drake before answering. "That's what I've come to discuss. The town council is meeting tonight to address the situation." Drake's jaw tightened. "Let me guess, Buchanan has already offered a solution." Mayor Jackson shifted uncomfortably. "He has proposed accelerating his plans for the new academy. In the meantime, classes could be held in a building he owns on Main Street." "How convenient." Drake's voice was cold. "The school burns, and Buchanan just happens to have an alternative ready." "We have children who need education," the mayor protested. "What would you suggest?" "The church," Lillian interjected. "We could use the church temporarily while the schoolhouse is repaired." "Repaired?" Mayor Jackson seemed surprised. "Miss Thompson, the damage is extensive." "It might be more practical to accept Mr. Buchanan's offer, at least temporarily." "And give him exactly what he wants," Drake challenged. "Control over this town's education," the mayor bristled. "I'm trying to be practical, Drake. Where will the money come for repairs?" "The town treasury is limited." "I'll pay for it," Drake stated firmly. Both Lillian and the mayor stared at him in surprise. "You'll what?" Mayor Jackson sputtered. "I'll fund the repairs," Drake repeated. "Every plank, every nail, every book that was lost. Silver Creek Ranch will cover it." "Drake, that's too much," Lillian protested. "The cost would be substantial." He met her eyes steadily. "Some things are worth the price, Lillian." The meaning behind his words made her breath catch. This was about more than a schoolhouse now. It was a declaration of something deeper, a promise made not just to the town but to her. "Very well," Mayor Jackson said, clearly taken aback by Drake's offer. "I'll inform the council, but Mr. Buchanan won't be pleased." "Mr. Buchanan's pleasure isn't my concern," Drake replied evenly. "The education of Dalhart's children is." After the mayor departed, Lillian turned to Drake. "Why would you do this? It's your money, your livelihood." "The ranch can afford it," he assured her, "and it's the right thing to do." "Is that the only reason?" she asked softly. Drake hesitated, then stepped closer. "No," he admitted, his voice low. "It's not the only reason." The air between them seemed to crackle with tension, with possibility. Lillian found herself holding her breath, waiting for what might come next. But Drake took a step back, his expression conflicted. "It's getting late. I should see you safely home." The moment passed, leaving Lillian with a curious mixture of disappointment and anticipation. Something had changed between them tonight, something that couldn't be undone or ignored. Word of Drake's offer spread through town by morning, eliciting mixed reactions. Many praised his generosity, while others, particularly those aligned with Buchanan, questioned his motives. Thomas Buchanan himself was conspicuously silent on the matter. With the church secured as a temporary schoolhouse, Lillian worked tirelessly to recreate what had been lost. Several families contributed books, slate boards, and other supplies. Even Daniel Buchanan, Drake's brother, arrived one afternoon with a wagon loaded with lumber for new desks, his daughter Nora proudly helping to unload it. "Drake didn't send us," Daniel clarified, a leaner version of his brother with the same blue eyes but a more open expression. "This is from me and Nora. We believe in what you're doing here." "Thank you," Lillian said sincerely. "Every bit of help means more than you know." Daniel nodded, then added hesitantly, "I haven't seen my brother this invested in anything or anyone in years." "Whatever you're doing, Miss Thompson, don't stop." The comment lingered in Lillian's mind as she continued her preparations. She hadn't seen Drake since the night of the fire, though she'd heard he was overseeing the schoolhouse repairs personally, hiring carpenters from as far as Amarillo to speed the process. 3 days after the fire, as Lillian was writing lesson plans in her room at the boarding house, Mrs. Pierce knocked on her door. "You have a visitor, dear," the older woman informed her with barely concealed excitement. "Mr. Drake Buchanan. He's waiting in the parlor." Lillian's heart leapt as she checked her appearance quickly in the small mirror, smoothing her hair before descending to the parlor. Drake stood by the window, hat in hand, dressed more formally than she'd ever seen him, in a crisp white shirt and dark vest. "Drake," she greeted him, suddenly shy. He turned, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Lillian, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." She gestured to the settee, but Drake remained standing. "Actually, I was hoping you might join me for a ride," he said. "There's something I'd like to show you." Curiosity piqued, Lillian agreed, quickly donning her bonnet and shawl. Outside, she found not Drake's usual mount but a handsome buggy polished to a shine. "This is new," she commented as he helped her up. "Borrowed from Daniel," Drake admitted, settling beside her. "Thought it might be more comfortable for you than riding horseback." As they drove out of town, Lillian realized they were heading toward Silver Creek Ranch. The landscape opened before them, rolling prairie dotted with cattle, the distant line of trees marking the creek that gave the ranch its name. "It's beautiful," she said truthfully. Drake's expression softened as he surveyed his land. "It is, especially this time of year." The ranch house, when they reached it, surprised Lillian. Rather than the rough cabin she had imagined, it was a substantial two-story home of dressed stone and timber, with a wide porch and glass windows. Sarah designed it, Drake explained as he helped her down from the buggy. She wanted something that would last generations, something our children would inherit. The mention of the children they never had shadowed his features momentarily. She had vision, Lillian said gently. Drake nodded, leading her toward the house. That she did. Come, there's something specific I want to show you. Inside, the house was well appointed but clearly a bachelor's dwelling, functional rather than decorative, though signs of a woman's touch remained in the curtains and quilts. Drake led her through to a room at the back of the house. When he opened the door, Lillian gasped. It was a library, walls lined with bookshelves from floor to ceiling, filled with hundreds of volumes. A large desk stood by the window, and comfortable reading chairs were arranged near a small fireplace. Sarah loved books, Drake explained, watching Lillian's reaction. She collected them wherever we traveled. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to enter this room for almost a year. Lillian moved to the shelves, running her fingers gently along the spines. It's wonderful, she breathed. Like a piece of civilization in the wilderness. That's what Sarah used to say. Drake's voice was thick with memory. She believed education was the future of the West, that books could change lives. Turning to face him, Lillian asked, "Why are you showing me this?" Drake took a deep breath. "Because I want you to take them. For the school." Lillian stared at him in disbelief. "Drake, no. These are your memories of her, your connection. Sarah would want them to be used, not sitting gathering dust," he interrupted gently. "She'd want children reading them, learning from them. And—" He hesitated. "I think she would have liked you, Lillian, very much." The depth of what he was offering, not just books, but a piece of his heart, his past, moved Lillian profoundly. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept them. For the children." Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "Thank you. It's an incredible gift." Drake stepped closer, his gaze intense. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, something important." Lillian's pulse quickened at his tone. "Yes." Before he could continue, the sound of hoofbeats approached rapidly. Drake frowned, moving to the window. "It's Daniel," he said, concern creasing his brow. "Something's wrong." They hurried outside to meet Daniel, who reined his horse to a sharp stop, his expression grave. "Sheriff sent me to find you," he said without preamble. "There's trouble in town." Buchanan's made his move. "What kind of move?" Drake demanded. "He's filed papers claiming the school property was never properly deeded to the town," Daniel explained. "Says it belongs to him as part of a larger parcel he purchased last year. He's got a judge from Amarillo backing his claim." "That's absurd," Lillian protested. "The schoolhouse has stood there for 10 years. Without proper documentation, possession doesn't matter," Drake said grimly. "It's an old trick: buy unclear titles, then claim everything connected to them." "There's more," Daniel continued reluctantly. "The judge has also reviewed your teaching credentials, Miss Thompson. Claims they are insufficient under new territorial guidelines apparently just established." "This is Buchanan's revenge," Drake growled, "for refusing his offer and for my funding the repairs." Lillian's mind raced with implications. If he owns the land and I'm deemed unqualified, he'll control education in Dalhart completely. "Exactly." Drake turned to his brother. "When is this being announced?" "Town meeting tonight. Buchanan wanted it done officially, with legal witnesses." Drake's jaw set in determination. "Then we'll be there. We're not letting him win this easily." He glanced at Lillian. "Are you with me?" Despite her rising anxiety, Lillian straightened her shoulders. "Completely." The town hall was packed when they arrived, tension thick in the air. Thomas Buchanan stood at the front beside Mayor Jackson, a distinguished-looking man in judicial robes at his side. Charlotte sat nearby, barely concealing her triumphant expression. Drake guided Lillian to seats near the front, his hand protective at the small of her back. The touch gave her courage as whispers followed their entrance. Mayor Jackson called the meeting to order, his discomfort evident as he introduced Judge Harrington from Amarillo. The judge, a thin man with calculating eyes, addressed the gathering with practiced authority. "Citizens of Dalhart," he began, "I've been asked to review certain legal matters pertaining to property and educational standards in your community. My findings are conclusive and binding under territorial law." He proceeded to outline Buchanan's claim to the school property, presenting documents that suggested the land had never been properly transferred to town ownership. Next, he turned to Lillian's qualifications. While Miss Thompson's education appears adequate, her certification does not meet the standards recently established for frontier schools. As such, she is not legally qualified to continue as Dalhart's teacher. Murmurs of protest rose from several parents, quickly silenced by the judge's stern look. "Mr. Buchanan has generously offered to resolve both issues," the judge continued. "He will donate a new parcel for educational purposes and fund construction of a modern academy to be staffed by properly certified teachers from Eastern institutions." "How convenient," Drake said loudly, rising to his feet. "Buchanan burns down our school, invalidates our teacher, then offers to save us from problems he created." Gasps rippled through the crowd at the direct accusation. Thomas Buchanan's face darkened with anger. "That's a serious allegation, Mr. Buchanan," Judge Harrington said coldly. "One without evidence, I presume." "The timing speaks for itself," Drake replied. "And I question the legitimacy of these recently established standards that suddenly disqualify a teacher the children and parents respect." "The law is the law," the judge insisted. "Your personal opinions don't change that." Lillian stood then, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "May I ask, Your Honor, when exactly these new standards were established, and by whom?" The judge hesitated fractionally. "The Territorial Education Board, last month." "Strange," Lillian replied, "as I received correspondence from that same board just 2 weeks ago commending our school's progress. No mention was made of new standards." A ripple of interest moved through the crowd. The judge glanced at Thomas Buchanan, who stepped forward smoothly. "Administrative oversight, no doubt," Buchanan suggested. "Regardless, the standards exist now and Miss Thompson doesn't meet them. It's unfortunate, but progress requires adaptation." "What it requires is honesty," Drake countered. "Show us these new standards. Let us see the documentation for your land claim. If everything's legitimate, you should have nothing to hide." Buchanan's smile tightened. "The judge has reviewed everything. His word should be sufficient." "Not when his word threatens our children's education and our town's autonomy," Drake insisted. The confrontation might have escalated further, but a newcomer's arrival interrupted the proceedings. A tall man in a U.S. Marshal's uniform entered, surveying the room with practiced eyes. "Judge Harrington," he called, his voice carrying easily. "Thought I might find you here." The judge's face paled visibly. "Marshal Bennett, what brings you to Dalhart? Interesting paperwork crossed my desk." The marshal moved to the front of the room. "Complaints about sudden changes to educational standards, land disputes with suspicious timing." His gaze settled on Thomas Buchanan, and reports of a judge exceeding his jurisdiction. Buchanan's composure slipped momentarily. "This is a local matter, Marshal. Your presence isn't required." "When judicial impropriety is alleged, it becomes federal business," the marshal replied evenly. He turned to the crowd. "I'll be reviewing all documentation related to these matters. In the meantime, no changes to school property or personnel will take effect. Relief washed through Lillian, though she knew this was only a temporary reprieve. Judge Harrington looked distinctly uncomfortable, while Thomas Buchanan's expression had hardened into barely controlled fury. As the meeting dissolved into excited discussion, Drake guided Lillian outside into the cool evening air. "You were magnificent," he said quietly, "standing up to them like that." "Where did the marshal come from?" Lillian asked, still processing what had happened. Drake's eyes twinkled. "Daniel rode to Amarillo yesterday with some concerns about Buchanan's sudden legal maneuverings. Seems the marshal found them compelling enough to investigate." "So we have time," Lillian realized. "Time and a fighting chance," Drake agreed. His expression grew serious. "But Buchanan won't give up easily. This will get worse before it gets better." "I'm not afraid," Lillian said, surprised to find it was true. "Not anymore." Drake studied her face in the lamplight, something soft and wondering in his gaze. "Lillian Thompson, you are the bravest woman I've ever known." The admiration in his voice warmed her more than any shawl could. They stood close, the noise of the meeting fading behind them, the night wrapping around them like a cloak. "Drake," she began hesitantly, "before Daniel arrived at the ranch, you said you had something important to discuss." He nodded, his expression suddenly vulnerable. I do." Lillian waited, heart pounding as he seemed to gather his courage. "I've been alone a long time," he finally said. "After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd live out my days with just memories for company." He took her hands in his, strong and warm. "Then you arrived in Dalhart and everything changed." "Drake," she whispered, scarcely daring to believe what she was hearing. "I know it's soon," he continued. "I know there's still Buchanan to deal with and the school to rebuild, but I can't wait any longer to tell you how I feel." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I love you, Lillian. I never expected to love anyone again, but here you are and here I am, and I'm asking hoping that you might consider allowing me to court you, properly." Joy bubbled up within her, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "I would like that very much," she managed to say. Drake's face transformed with happiness, years seeming to fall away. "Truly," in answer, Lillian rose on her tiptoes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Truly." His hands tightened on hers, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her properly. But voices approached from the town hall and Drake reluctantly stepped back, though he kept one of her hands in his. "I should get you home," he said softly, "but this conversation isn't over." "I certainly hope not," Lillian replied, her smile matching his own. The following weeks brought both challenges and unexpected joys. Marshal Bennett's investigation revealed irregularities in Thomas Buchanan's land claims and connections between the judge and Buchanan's business interests that bordered on corruption. While the legal matters proceeded slowly, Drake and Daniel organized volunteers to accelerate repairs on the schoolhouse. True to his word, Drake arranged for books from Sarah's library to be transferred to the school, creating a lending library for students and their families. Lillian continued teaching in the church, her classes now attended by nearly every child in Dalhart as parents rallied behind her. Even some who had initially supported Buchanan's plans reconsidered as the marshal's findings became public. Throughout it all, Drake courted Lillian with a gentle persistence that touched her deeply. They rode together on Sundays after church, dined at the hotel under Mrs. Pierce's approving eye, and spent evenings on the boarding house porch talking about books, dreams, and the future. One crisp November afternoon, as Lillian dismissed her students, she found not only Drake waiting outside but Daniel and Nora as well. "We have a surprise," Nora announced excitedly before either man could speak. "The schoolhouse is finished." "What?" Lillian looked to Drake for confirmation. He nodded, his smile wide. The last of the desks were installed this morning. It's ready for inspection, Schoolmarm Thompson. They rode together to the schoolhouse, Nora chattering happily about the improvements, Daniel adding practical details about construction, and Drake watching Lillian's reaction with barely concealed anticipation. When they arrived, Lillian gasped in delight. The rebuilt schoolhouse was larger than before, with a covered porch and larger windows. Inside, new desks gleamed in neat rows, bookshelves lined the walls filled with Sarah's books, and a proper teacher's desk stood at the front, crafted from polished oak. "Drake," she breathed, taking it all in. "It's wonderful. Better than before." "There's more," he said, leading her to a door at the back that hadn't existed in the original building. When he opened it, Lillian discovered a small but well-appointed apartment, a sitting room with bookshelves, a bedroom, and a tiny kitchen. "Teacher's quarters," Drake explained, "so you don't have to walk back and forth to town in winter weather." The thoughtfulness of it brought tears to her eyes. "You've thought of everything." "I tried," he admitted. "I wanted it to be perfect for you." Daniel cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "Nora and I will head back to the ranch," he said, exchanging a knowing look with his brother. "You two probably have things to discuss." After they departed, Drake led Lillian back to the main room of the schoolhouse. "There's one more feature I added," he said, pointing to a brass plaque beside the door. It read, "Sarah Buchanan Memorial Library." "Oh, Drake," Lillian's heart swelled with emotion. "It's perfect. She would be so proud." "I think she would," he agreed softly. Sarah believed in building things that last, not just structures, but communities' futures. He took Lillian's hands in his. "That's what you're doing here, what we're doing together." Lillian felt the weight of the moment, the significance of his words. "Together," she echoed. Drake's eyes were intense as they held hers. "I meant what I said about courting you properly, Lillian. These weeks with you have been the happiest I've known in years, but I need to know, do you see a future for us? Beyond the school, beyond Buchanan's schemes?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Yes, Drake, I do." The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. Slowly, reverently, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss that held both promise and question. Lillian responded with a certainty that surprised her, her hands moving to his shoulders as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I love you," Drake whispered against her temple. "I think I've loved you since you stood up at that town meeting and spoke your mind without fear." "I love you too," Lillian confessed. "Though I tried to tell myself it was too soon, that I came here to teach, not to fall in love with a stubborn rancher." Drake laughed, the sound rich and full. "Life rarely follows our plans, does it?" "Thankfully, no," she agreed, smiling up at him. Their newfound happiness faced its greatest test 2 weeks later when Thomas Buchanan made his final play. With the marshal's investigation threatening his plans, he attempted a different approach, offering to buy Silver Creek Ranch for an unprecedented sum. The offer came by letter, delivered to Drake at the ranch. He rode immediately to the schoolhouse, finding Lillian after classes ended. "He's offered 3 times what the ranch is worth," Drake explained as they walked along Silver Creek, bare trees rustling in the late autumn wind. "Enough to build a new ranch anywhere else, with money left over for generations." Lillian studied his troubled expression. "Are you considering it?" "No," Drake said firmly. "Silver Creek isn't for sale, not at any price. But he's also offered to drop all claims against the school property and your position, to leave Dalhart entirely. In exchange for your land." Lillian understood now his conflict. "He's using the school, using me as leverage against you," Drake nodded grimly. "He knows I'll fight for the ranch, but he also knows." He hesitated, then continued softly. He knows how much I care about you, about your future here. Drake. Lillian stopped, turning to face him fully. I would never ask you to give up Silver Creek. Not for me, not for anything. I know you wouldn't ask, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But I'd consider it, Lillian, for peace, for a future without Buchanan's shadow hanging over us. The magnitude of what he was saying, that he would consider giving up his legacy, his connection to Sarah, for her, humbled Lillian beyond words. She reached up, cupping his face in her hands. Listen to me, she said firmly. We are not giving in to Thomas Buchanan. Not now, not ever. This is our town, our school, your ranch. We'll fight for all of it together. Drake's eyes searched hers, finding the determination there. Slowly, he nodded. Together, he agreed. Then, with a decision made, he added, I have something to ask you, Lillian. Something I've been carrying with me for days, waiting for the right moment. From his pocket, he withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band with a modest diamond that caught the late afternoon sunlight. This was my mother's, he explained. I'd be honored if you would wear it as my wife. Lillian's breath caught. Drake, I know it's fast, he rushed to add. I know proper courtship should take longer, but these aren't proper times, and I'm tired of waiting for the perfect moment when every moment with you already is perfect. Joy bubbled up within her, bright and irrepressible. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. Drake slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise. When they broke apart, both were smiling. Buchanan's not going to like this, Drake said, but there was no worry in his tone now, only determination. Then let's tell him together, Lillian suggested boldly. Show him what he's really up against. The next day, they rode to Buchanan's rented house in town, a fine two-story building that stood apart from the more modest structures. Charlotte answered their knock, her surprise evident as she reluctantly showed them into her father's study. Thomas Buchanan looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from irritation to calculation as he registered his visitors. Drake, Miss Thompson, this is unexpected. We've come to respond to your offer, Drake stated without preamble. Buchanan leaned back in his chair, confidence radiating from him. I assumed you'd see reason eventually. The terms are generous. We're not here to accept, Lillian clarified, stepping forward. We're here to tell you that Silver Creek Ranch is not for sale. Not now, not ever. And neither am I, she continued, her voice steady. Your attempts to undermine my position, to use me against Drake, have failed, just as your attempts to control this town have failed. Buchanan's face darkened. Bold words from a schoolteacher whose position remains legally precarious. Not anymore, Drake countered. Marshall Bennett's report cleared all questions about Lillian's qualifications, and the land dispute has been resolved. The original deed to the town has been located in county records. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Buchanan's features. There are other ways to acquire what I want, he threatened. Other parcels, other water rights. Perhaps, Drake acknowledged, but not Silver Creek, and not this town's future. He placed an arm around Lillian's shoulders. We came to inform you of our decision and of one other thing. Lillian held up her hand, the ring catching the light. We're to be married, Mr. Buchanan. This town, this school, this land, they're our shared future now. We will defend them together. Charlotte gasped from the doorway, while her father's face registered first shock, then calculating reassessment. I see, Buchanan said finally. Well, congratulations are in order, I suppose. Thank you, Drake replied evenly. We also wanted to extend an invitation to leave Dalhart peaceably. Your development plans won't succeed here. The town stands united against them, pride flashed in Buchanan's eyes. I don't retreat, Drake. You should know that by now. Neither do we, Lillian stated calmly, but prolonging this fight serves no one. There are other towns, other opportunities that don't require destroying what others have built. For a long moment, Buchanan studied them, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "My daughter and I will consider our options. That's all I can offer." It wasn't surrender, but it was the closest they were likely to get. Drake nodded and they took their leave, both sensing the confrontation had shifted something fundamental in their favor. 2 weeks later, without announcement or fanfare, Thomas Buchanan and Charlotte departed Dalhart, their belongings packed into 2 carriages bound for the train station in Amarillo. Rumors suggested they were headed to Oklahoma Territory, where new settlements offered fresh opportunities for ambitious men. The schoolhouse reopened officially the first week of December, with a celebration that brought the entire town together. Lillian stood on the porch, watching as families explored the improved building, children exclaiming over the new books and parents admiring the craftsmanship of the desks. "Quite a change from when you arrived," Drake commented, coming to stand beside her. "Remember that dusty stagecoach ride into town? How could I forget?" Lillian smiled. "I was terrified I'd made a terrible mistake coming to this wild place. And now," he took her hand, his thumb brushing over her ring. "Now I can't imagine being anywhere else," she replied honestly. "With anyone else?" Mayor Jackson approached, beaming. "Miss Thompson, soon to be Mrs. Buchanan. I should say the town council has voted unanimously to offer you a permanent contract, with a salary increase to reflect your additional duties as librarian." "Thank you, Mayor," Lillian said, touched by the gesture. "I accept gladly." As the mayor moved on to speak with other residents, Drake slipped an arm around Lillian's waist. "January wedding," he suggested, "unless that's too soon." "January is perfect," she agreed, leaning into him. "Though Mrs. Pierce will be devastated to lose her only boarder. She's already extracted a promise from me to bring you to Sunday dinner twice a month," Drake admitted with a laugh. "I think she's appointed herself our unofficial guardian." Their conversation was interrupted by Nora, who bounded up the steps with Daniel following more sedately behind. "Is it true?" the girl demanded. "You're going to be my aunt." "It is indeed true," Lillian confirmed, bending to embrace the child. "If that's all right with you." "It's more than all right," Nora declared. "Now you can teach me at home too, not just at school." Daniel laughed at his daughter's enthusiasm. "Careful, Lillian. She'll have you running lessons day and night." He extended his hand to Drake. "Congratulations, brother. You finally found a woman stubborn enough to match you." "I consider it a compliment," Lillian said with a smile. As the celebration continued into the evening, with music and dancing on the schoolhouse lawn despite the December chill, Drake pulled Lillian away from the crowd, leading her to a quiet spot beneath the stars. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Completely," she assured him, resting her hands on his chest. "Though I'm still amazed by how much has changed in such a short time. When I stepped off that stagecoach, I never imagined any of this." Drake's expression grew thoughtful. "I remember seeing you that first day, watching my argument with Buchanan. Something about the way you observed everything, taking it all in. I couldn't stop thinking about you after that. And here I thought you were just concerned about my teaching methods," Lillian teased. "That too," he admitted with a grin. "But mostly I was captivated by the Boston schoolteacher with fire in her eyes and courage in her heart." "Flattery will get you everywhere, Mr. Buchanan," Lillian murmured, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him. Drake responded with a tenderness that still made her heart race, his arms tightening around her as if she were precious beyond measure. When they parted, his eyes held hers in the starlight. "I love you, Lillian Thompson," he said softly. "More than I can say." "And I love you," she replied. enough to spend a lifetime showing you just how much. From the schoolhouse, music and laughter drifted on the cold night air, sounds of community, of celebration, of a future being built word by word, heart by heart. Drake offered Lillian his arm, and together they walked back toward the light, toward their new beginning. On a crisp January morning in 1875, Lillian Thompson became Lillian Buchanan in a ceremony that filled Dalhart's small church to capacity. She wore a gown of ivory silk that Sophia Reed had helped her select from a catalog, with a lace veil that had once belonged to Drake's mother. Drake waited at the altar, more handsome than she'd ever seen him in a new black suit, his face alight with joy as she walked toward him on Daniel's arm. Nora preceded her as flower girl, scattering petals with solemn purpose. Their vows were simple but profound promises of love, fidelity, and partnership spoken before God and their community. When Drake slipped a gold band to join her engagement ring, his hands trembled slightly, betraying the depth of his emotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Drake's kiss was reverent yet passionate, drawing cheers from the assembled townspeople. The celebration afterward spilled from the church to the hotel, where tables groaned with food contributed by every family in Dalhart. There was dancing and laughter, toasts and well wishes, until the winter sun began to set. Drake and Lillian departed amid a shower of rice, boarding a sleigh that would carry them to Silver Creek Ranch to home. Wrapped in furs against the cold, they watched Dalhart fade behind them as the horses pulled them across the snowy landscape. "Happy, Mrs. Buchanan?" Drake asked, his arm secure around her shoulders. Lillian smiled up at him, her heart full. "Happier than I ever thought possible." As the sleigh crested a hill, Silver Creek Ranch came into view, windows glowing with welcome light. The house that had once seemed haunted by memories now stood ready for new ones for their future together. "Welcome home, my love," Drake whispered, and kissed her beneath the vast Texas sky as stars began to appear, one by one, in the gathering darkness. 5 years later, on a warm spring afternoon in 1880, Lillian sat on the porch of Silver Creek Ranch, watching her 3-year-old son James chase butterflies across the yard while baby Sarah slept in her cradle nearby. The ranch had prospered under Drake and Daniel's management, expanding to become one of the most successful in the Panhandle. The schoolhouse in Dalhart had likewise flourished, now employing 2 teachers besides Lillian, who divided her time between her family and her position as head teacher. The lending library had grown to occupy a separate building, funded by donations from grateful families whose children had discovered the magic of books. Hoofbeats announced Drake's return from checking the herds. He dismounted with the easy grace that still made her heart skip, lifting James into his arms as the boy ran to greet him. "And how are my favorite people today?" he asked, settling beside Lillian on the porch swing, James perched on his knee. "We're well," Lillian replied, leaning to kiss him. "James has been helping me plant the kitchen garden, and Sarah has been a perfect angel." "Papa, I saw a snake," James announced importantly. "A big one, did you now?" Drake raised an eyebrow at Lillian, who shook her head slightly. "It was a garden hose," she clarified in a whisper that made Drake laugh. As the afternoon light bathed the land in gold, Lillian reflected on the journey that had brought her here from a stagecoach arrival in a dusty town to this life rich with love and purpose. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Drake asked, noting her expression. "About that day we met in the schoolhouse," she replied. "When you warned me about Thomas Buchanan." Drake nodded, remembering. "You were so determined to stay neutral, to focus only on teaching." "And you knew that wouldn't be possible," Lillian acknowledged. That in Dalhart in life, we have to choose what we stand for. And who we stand with, Drake added softly, his hand finding hers. James wiggled down from his father's lap, returning to his exploration of the yard. Drake watched him go, pride evident in his gaze. Any regrets, he asked, turning back to Lillian. About choosing this life. This stubborn rancher, Lillian's answer was in her kiss tender, passionate, and certain. Not one, she whispered against his lips. Not ever. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of fire, the Buchanan family gathered on their porch witness to the beauty of the land, the strength of their bond, and the promise of all the tomorrows still to come. In the distance, Dalhart was visible, a growing town with a future secured by those who had stood together against forces that would have changed it beyond recognition. And at its heart, a schoolhouse where children learned not just reading and arithmetic, but courage and conviction, lessons taught by a teacher who had once declared, simply and powerfully, "I'm not for sale." Some things, Lillian knew, were beyond price. Love, integrity, home. These were the treasures she and Drake had fought for, had built their life upon. These were the legacy they would pass to their children, to their community, to all who would come after them. As darkness fell and stars appeared above Silver Creek Ranch, Drake drew Lillian close, his voice a gentle murmur against her hair. "I thank God every day that you stepped off that stagecoach, Lillian, that you chose to stay, that you chose us." "As do I," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. "As do I." And in that moment, with their children sleeping peacefully, their home secure, and their future bright with promise, Lillian knew a contentment that transcended all the challenges they had faced. This was what it meant to find one's place in the world, not merely a location on a map, but a place in the heart, a purpose that aligned with one's deepest values. This was what it meant to be truly, completely free.